arts, culture and heritage will be discussed by members of the ANC gathered at the policy conference in Nasrec. It's part of the agenda today. For more on how that space has been treated by the ruling party, we're joined by Tshepo Mashiane, National Arts Council spokesperson. Thank you very much, sir, for your patience with us and for availing yourself this afternoon. To their credit, the ruling party in their policy document does admit that it has fallen way short of expectations and its own expectations when it comes to the space of arts, culture and heritage in South Africa. From the work that you do, what is it that young people and people of old are telling you about how they have been treated?
Thank you very much, and let me thank the Newzroom Afrika for the invite. But let me start with a disclaimer that I am not the National Arts Council spokesperson anymore. I think there's a capable person who has been put to that particular responsibility. And I would want, again, as a disclaimer, to say I will be speaking with Newzroom Afrika audience and viewers as a practitioner. So I think, based on your question, I think one of the things, having read the document myself, is really my analysis will be metaphorical. And the metaphor here is that, it's of a king who is 110 years old, who has called his subjects into a crawl, and is basically outlining and being honest about the fact that he has failed his subjects in one way or the other, but also shifting blame with regards to the work that he had to do during his reign. And that's a metaphor of what I pick up on the document. And I think this is a view that could be shared by many who's been in the industry, practitioners like myself. And I say this because if you look at the document, it starts with really shifting the blame that, in fact, the policies of arts, culture and heritage were not crafted by the African National Congress because at the time of the government of national unity, they needed to cede some of the responsibilities, and that responsibility was ceded to a smaller party. However, the contradiction here is that when you look at the document as well, it starts with saying that arts, culture and heritage is an important tenet to build a nation, but also to make sure that people unite around a common identity. It would be therefore correct, again, that the document does declare that it has failed. The ANC has failed, and it has overlooked the arts, culture and heritage during the democratic transition. So all of these things are issues that we need to be able to then, as subjects in this metaphor, decide whether we are in a position to, accept these particular truths that are told by a 110-year-old king who's about to, in fact, pass on, and take a decision on whether or not do we accept some of the things that he's saying, wishing to lead beyond his term of failing, openly saying this in his speech, or in this case in the policy document. So the policy document, so far as I am concerned, it's quite telling, because it does, to a large extent, which is the right thing, it does accept that the African National Congress has failed the arts, culture and heritage sector. But most importantly is that we should also understand that the sector itself is not a vacuum. You've got millions of citizens that have been failed by the African National Congress as it articulates in its document. So that will be, I think, something that I've picked up on the document. Thank you.
Sure. Well, let's stay on this metaphor, right, of the 110-year-old king. And you have found subjects that have stood up and have said, well, not in our names. Usisbongile comes to mind, where she was brutally dealt with and even, violated in terms of her clothes being stripped off of her. So the policy document has general recommendations for arts, culture and heritage. And one of those recommendations speaks of coming up with new funding methods to ensure sustainable resourcing of the arts, culture and heritage even during periods of economic challenges. Lessons can be gleaned from other countries. When you take a look at other kingdoms, Senegal has the Museum of Black Civilization. Ghana is currently working on the World Heritage Museum that will be taking a look at being a memory bank for African heritage, arts and culture. This 110-year-old king, you speak of him dying a very slow death, quite soon. How would you then rate him when it comes to this issue?
Well, I think that, it then depends on the subjects. Okay. It depends on the subjects whether they should take the king seriously. That he openly indicates that 30 years later, nothing has been done. In fact, there was a direct overlook of this particular sector and its practitioners. So I think the recommendations should be therefore viewed within a context of the failure. And it should be that the subjects are able to rise and probably provide new approaches to their realities. And in this sense, I do think that some of the things that I've picked up on the recommendations, by the way, are things are matters that are 30 years old. They've been discussed since 1994. And I'll make an example on matters of cultural diplomacy. I mean, in this country, to date, there is no a policy on cultural diplomacy, which its importance is to make sure that when practitioners and South African citizens are somewhere in the world, they are protected by this policy. But most importantly, that this policy has got to be able to put forward the importance of cultural diplomacy and what one would call soft power, people-to-people connection and interaction. So this policy does not exist. So the view that the forward-looking, recommendations of this policy, the extent to which the subjects will look at it and trust it, lies on the subjects themselves. But as you correctly say, there are many subjects who went on to say, this we've talked about for the longest time, we're tired, it's about time that we go and find our own way. And I think this has been quite visible, and we've all witnessed what you correctly say. And I think that indeed one would really be an observer to see what happens in 2024 of all those that today we know openly the ANC saying it has overlooked them. So I think it is upon the subjects to decide what they do with now what the king says at 110 years old he will do differently.
A saying comes to mind, I think it was the song Yakamamle Tambulu, where she says, Ilifa lezithutha lidliwa ngabahlakaniphileyo. Thank you very much to cultural and creative practitioner Tshepo Mashiane.